I need at least 15 minutes to say everything I know about our presenter today, but she tells me I only have one. So I've known her for a while. HASP member Patricia Locke has an undergraduate degree from Illinois Wesleyan University. She is also a graduate of McCormick Theological Seminary. Prior to ordination in the Presbyterian Church USA, she served as a textbook editor, freelance writer, and communications copywriter. Patricia is the author of a book, 2018 book, titled Now and Not Yet, Sermons of Hope and Grace, and I've heard many of them. I'm pleased to introduce Pat Locke.
Has heard many of them, yet he still acknowledges he knows me. So I'm so glad to see all of you. Originally, I think there was some like 50 people signed up, and I thought, I'm going to have to ask a few of you to leave because this is making me way too nervous. So I'm so glad to see all of you that are here. Well, let's talk about Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie Miller, no, excuse me, it was a Dame Agatha Miller Christie Mallowan. Not a name, a lot of names. She was born on September 15th, 1890 in Torquay, Devon in England. And she died on January the 12th, 1976 at Winterbrook House in Wallingford, England. She is called the Queen of Crime. You've probably heard her referred to as that before. Christie is the best-selling author of all time. She wrote during what has been called the golden age of detective fiction, roughly between the two world wars. Although some Christie fans say that her golden age extended a little farther, I would agree with that, more like into the 50s. By the time of her death in the 70s, she was still writing, but there's a big noticeable difference if any of you have read some of those, that they're not her usual quality. Her works are outsold only by the Bible and the works of William Shakespeare. Agatha Christie novels have sold over 2 billion copies, and she remains the most translated individual author to date. Her total repertoire includes detective stories, romance novels, short stories, an autobiography, and several plays. In other words, she has 130 published pieces. And I seem to see that there's a list of all her publications just for your future reference if you want to find some of them. Christie's stage play, The Mousetrap, holds the world's record for the longest continuous run of a play. At the time she wrote it, she was having some tax issues with both the UK and the US. So they came to an agreement that the revenue from the play would not be taxed until after the run was over. Some of you are a little ahead of me on this. It opened on the Ambassadors Theatre in London's West End on November 25th, 1952, and is still running. No taxes yet. I don't think that they're all that interested in shutting it down. Let's see here. Isn't that a beautiful picture of her? I just love that. She said one time, I do not know the whole Agatha, I believe, is known only to God. And some of you may know Lucy Worsley, who was one of her biographers, and she also had a series on PBS, Lucy Worsley Investigates. She's a noted historian and presenter and author. She said her towering achievements are almost hidden in plain sight. All right, you ready for true false questions? I know you are. Now I'm just gonna say these, and if you know, you can shout it out. Doug wouldn't like that because he'd rather run around with the microphone so people at home can hear. But okay, Agatha Christie was once investigated by the British intelligence agency MI5. True, she was. Actually, the story about that is that during the Second World War, she named a character in her book Bletchley was his last name. It was a character she didn't like, and she named him Bletchley. And they said, does she have a spy at Bletchley? The famous place in England where it was Bletchley Park, where things were decoded. And she said, no, I was stuck on a train and I was trying to get some writing done, and I looked out the window and there was Bletchley Park. So that's how that happened. She loved to surf. Some people know a lot about Agatha Christie here, I can tell. Yes, she loved to surf. We'll see pictures of that in a minute. She married a man 14 years younger than herself. Yes. She had a favorite drink. It was cream, straight, no chaser, which is maybe explains a little bit about how she got a little heavy towards the end of her life. But anybody gonna say yes or no? I guess I already gave it away though, didn't I? Taught herself to read when she was 5 years old. She famously, most people know this, she famously disappeared for 11 days. She studied to be a concert pianist. I just hear mumbling. We're not so sure about that one. Yeah, she did, and she was quite good. She studied for many years and she worked really, really hard. This was when she was quite young. One last one. She had her books featured in 2016 as the subject of 6 Royal Mail postage stamps in England. Each design incorporated microtext, UV ink, and thermochromatic ink. The concealed clues could be revealed using either a magnifying glass, UV light, or body heat, and they provided pointers to the mystery's solution. It is true. Poor Agatha never knew about that because, that was a long time after she died. So, anyway, I was saying before, excuse me, I need a water. Let's go back to the picture of her at the window if we can. Yeah. So, if you look at this picture, as we did before, this was taken when she was in her 20s. And she really was beautiful. In fact, she was a stunner for most of her life. Today, when we think about Agatha Christie, most of us think about a matronly, middle-aged, self-effacing, modest, and easy to overlook to describe her. At least the first decades of her writing, she filled out forms as, what do you do? Occupation, housewife. And then later she put Mrs. Mallowan as who she was. She was born into the late Victorian world with very tight strictures about what women could and couldn't do. She was also born into a wealthy upper class family in Britain in a time when the class system there was particularly rigid. Agatha often played upon the fact that she looked so ordinary. She was famously shy, and as we shall see later on, she had good reason, especially later in her life, to keep a low profile. Author and historian Lucy Worsley, that I referred to and is up on your screen, talked about her achievements being hid in plain sight. In fact, she carefully crafted her image to be so ordinary that it concealed her real self. She said, "The reason I began to write was to avoid talking to people." I think some of us can relate to that. Here's an illustration for you. Agatha Christie was sitting quietly on a train when 2 women came in the car and sat down near her. And each woman had a copy of a different Agatha Christie book with her. The ladies had no idea that this matronly, middle-aged fellow passenger was Agatha Christie. And the 2 began to discuss the most famous author in the world. "I hear," said one of the ladies, "she drinks like a fish." Well, she didn't drink at all. I refer you to cream. That was her main tipple. She cute little girl. Look at that mischievous face. Agatha Miller was born in 1890 into this It is wealthy, socially well-regarded family at Ashfield House. It's in a seaside resort of Torquay in England. At the time, Torquay was thought of as the Riviera of England. The Miller family, she was Agatha Miller then, by virtue of wealth and the fact that Agatha's father had been born as an American, and all Americans are wealthy, right? That's what they thought. So they enjoyed a rather elevated social status. She had two siblings, Margaret, called Madge, who was born in 1879, and her brother, Louis Monty, was born in 1880. So obviously, Agatha was the bonus baby. And since her siblings were so much older than she was really cosseted and spoiled a lot by her mother, Clara. Sister Madge was also very kind and generous to Agatha, but Monty really couldn't be bothered with a sister that much younger. Madge was very beautiful. She was vivacious. Agatha Christie really looked up to her, just worshipped her. She describes Madge as having a lot of sexual magnetism. Monty was a different story. He was lazy, not very good at anything, so, why try? He was kicked out of Harrow, a prestigious school in England. Monty couldn't seem to hold a job, and the family always had to rescue him with money, et cetera, et cetera. Agatha called him a source of trouble and worry. He was into drugs and alcohol, and he died before the age of 50. Agatha Christie's father, Frederick Miller, was independently wealthy. Christie describes him as agreeable, loving, generous, and lazy. Let's see if I can find the next. There, this is Ashfield House, and there is her father, Frederick. Frederick was addicted to shopping. You don't hear that. I mean, you don't think of that for that era, but Frederick did what was expected of an upper class gentleman of the Victorian times, in that he didn't work. He didn't need to initially, and really didn't know how to work. There were some bad investments in America, some, not so good things that went on with his investments by people that couldn't be trusted. And it really caused their income to dwindle quite a bit. And he was puzzled. He couldn't understand what happened. And he really didn't know what to do about it. Agatha's mother, Clara, knew and loved her husband, Frederick, since she was 10. They were of a kind cousins. They weren't blood relatives, but the relationships are a little complicated. Christie describes her as enigmatic, with an arresting personality and natural melancholy. 8 members of Clara's family of origin had, where am I going here? 8 family of origin suffered from some mental illness of one kind or the other. She was strong, central figure in Agatha's life. Clara had really strongly held views, but she changed them often. She really believed that children should not be sent to school and should not be taught to read before the age of 8. But she sent both Agatha's older siblings to school. Agatha taught herself to read, as we were talking about before. She said she asked to be read the same stories over and over again so she could look at the words, and she learned to read by the look of them, she said. It wasn't a matter of she learned her ABCs and then began to put sentences together. She just knew she memorized what the words meant. Clara, here's a little insight in Clara. She started out as an adherent of the Church of England, which is not surprising, then became Roman Catholic, tried Unitarianism, became I'm not going to pronounce this right, Theosophist, and was briefly, I could pronounce this right either, Zoroastrian. Is that right, Doug? Zoroastrian? Okay. Before she went back to the C of E, the Church of England, to her husband Frederick's great relief. Agatha had a beloved nurse, a nanny, which she called Nursey. Very original. Nursey was a Bible Christian, if any of you know what that means. It meant she didn't go to church, but sat home on Sundays and she read the more fire and brimstone portions of the Bible. And I wonder how much that figured in to Christie's view of evil. Agatha really did have an idyllic childhood, although she didn't have very many friends of her own. She made friends with the servants, and she was very close, as I said, to Clara and to Nursey. She was really happier playing in the beautiful gardens at Ashfield. You really can't see, but I mean, they were gorgeous and huge. I could see where a child could, be lost all day long in them. She made up imaginary friends and elaborate stories to go with them and plots. One of her favorites was the kittens. It was a whole family, and they went on some adventures and also a great many trials and tribulations. There was a kidnapping and sword fights, but Agatha always rescued them. She had this child's rather ghoulish imagination, but she also had a big dose of Victorian romanticism. Despite her happy childhood, Agatha once wrote, "At the heart of even a happy home, a canker of evil must exist." Throughout her childhood, she had a recurring nightmare she referred to as the gunman. The dream would begin in a very ordinary day. Agatha would be enjoying tea with her family and her friends, and sudden feeling of uneasiness would creep over her. She became aware that someone in the tea party should not be there. And she would look into someone's eyes, someone that she knew very well, and realize they were really the gunmen. His fearsome pale blue eyes, she said, would meet hers and she'd wake up screaming. In her short story, House of Beauty, she draws on this. She writes, "He was awake, still quivering with the horror, the unutterable loathing of the thing that had come into the window and looked at him malevolently. For it was a thing so vile and loathsome that the mere remembrance of it made him feel sick." She often begged her sister Madge to play a game they called Elder Sister. Kind of an obvious name, but anyway, at unexpected moments, Madge would put on a veil over her face, and she would announce she was the elder sister. She would use a scary voice and ask Agatha if she thought she was really her sister Madge or someone else. "Are you sure, Agatha? Are you really sure I'm the older sister?" Christie later wrote, "The human face is, after all, nothing more than a mask." In Agatha Christie books, the murderer is often a trusted family member. In some respects, she was writing at a hinge point in English society. Victorian books usually depicted the murderer as someone from the outside. Victorians had a very colonial view of outsiders. That is, those from certain countries, skin colors, ethnic backgrounds were usually considered to be suspect and often less than. Outward appearance, she wrote, is not what we truly are, but yet she continued this on through most of her, even at some point she was called out on how she depicted Jewish characters, and some of her books were edited to remove these kind of gross descriptions that were very, very racist. Agatha's sister Madge dared her to write a novel write a detective novel and get it published. Madge herself was something of a writer. She had things published in magazines and serials and newspapers. Agatha's first published novel was The Mysterious Affair at Styles. I think many of us know that one. That's where she introduces her character of Hercule Poirot. After the success of her first detective novel, Agatha began writing as a second career while working as a volunteer nurse during the First World War. or the Great War as they referred to it. Post-traumatic stress disorder, as we know it today, was not recognized then and was called shell shock, if it was called anything at all, recognized at all. Female nurses experienced the same amount of trauma for the most part as soldiers, but that really had no name. Later, it was said this was a storing up of trouble for their future mental health. One of her first duties as a volunteer nurse was to carry an amputated limb to the incinerator to be burned. How's that for a first day of work? She mopped up a lot of blood. When Agatha came home at night, she was very careful not to tell her mother that she often saw sick, dirty, and naked men. The nursing was vital, however, for Agatha's as a fiction writer. Courage, she wrote, is the resolution to face the unforeseen. Later on, she was actually employed, she wasn't a volunteer anymore, in a hospital dispensary. Aha. So that's where Agatha learned all about poisons. Of her 66 detective novels, 41 feature a poisoning as a murder, attempted murder, or a suicide. Cyanide bumped off 18 people in her novels. It also figured into her perspective that poison could only be administered within the family. It's very interesting. Aha. Enter Archie Christie. Archibald Christie was 23 when he met Agatha, and he just qualified for the Royal Flying Corps. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, even from our modern perspective, we can see why Agatha fell for him. This young man, Agatha was engaged to another man when she met Archie, but hey, even in our modern view, Archie is one hot dude. And Agatha was engaged to another man when she met Archie, and if we look back with the eyes of history, this poor guy would have been far more suitable for her. But, you know, Agatha and Archie were married in 1914. He was so determined that she would marry him before he went off to war, which I think was a common theme, if not ploy, for soldiers going off to fight in the war with their girlfriends. He would say to her, "You've got to marry me. You have to marry me." It's like, you know. But they did get married before he went off to war, but they were separated for the 4 long years of the war. I don't think we realize in America just how long and bloody the First World War was for people in England and Europe. Agatha's biographer speaks of Archie as a decisive, ruthless man. And later, Agatha said of him, "Evil people are those who will not or cannot grow up. A man who is a child is the most frightening thing in the world." After the war, Archie returned to London, and he announced that he wanted to leave the RAF and look for more lucrative employment. He didn't say anything to Agatha about this until he made up his mind to do it. Agatha gave birth to her only child, Rosalind, in 1919. Archie had a really hard time finding work, and even after he found a job, he soon grew tired of domestic life. He missed the camaraderie of the war, of the men that he served with, and he spent a lot of time in his club, and he played golf every weekend. Archie was spending progressively more and more time away from home. Agatha knew in hindsight what had happened. Archie had once told her that he couldn't be relied upon. He wrote her a letter during the war saying, "I can't bear to think of you as ill or unhappy." And at the time she thought, "Oh, that was sweet." But later realized he meant he couldn't be around her if she was depressed or sick. Archie's fatal flaw was really a lack of empathy. Well, all right. Uh, all right, we'll look at pictures of Agatha surfing. I promised you. And she was surfing with Fred. Do you see the name carved in that enormous big wooden surfboard? I have no idea why it was called Fred. But can you imagine surfing? If you ever surfed or anything, can you imagine surfing with that big thing? I would think she'd have to be really, really good to even be able to do it. In 1924, a massive exhibition was to take place at Wembley in England. It was to showcase the products of the English Empire. And at that time, it was the English Empire. It was called the British Mission, and a group from the United Kingdom was to travel through many of the, I won't say all, but many of the colonies to see if any produced goods could be part of this exhibition. It was partly show us that you're not savages, and partly drumming up interest in and support for the exhibition. Archie was asked to be the chief financial officer, and for the Christies, it looked like this kind of grand aristocratic tour at a bargain price. The type of tour that the royals took, but miniature. Agatha was writing furiously, but she was to go along, and she was to leave Rosalind, who was only 2 at the time, and leave her with her sister Madge. The Christies were gone for 9 long months. I cannot imagine leaving a 2-year-old child for 9 months, even though Rosalind was very, very fond of Madge. It's not the same thing. Of course, having Agatha Christie, the famous novelist, along was wonderful publicity. And I wonder if the press coverage wasn't really pretty good for Agatha's career as well. The mission began in Madeira. I said, oh, wait, anyway. Then to South Africa, on to New Zealand, and it finished in Canada. And Archie and Agatha did plan to spend a month in Hawaii on a vacation before going to Canada. And it was the first honeymoon that they had ever taken together. And that's when we see our lovely surfer girl. Now, I did tell you that she absolutely loved it. In fact, she loved everything about that mission tour. Now, when I think of a mission tour, I think of something related to the church, but this was obviously not that. The Christies returned home to England, where Agatha wrote 11 books between 1921 and 1931. These included one of her most famous books, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. I think we're all free. That's kind of a basic Agatha Christie 101, I think. Oh yeah, there is a handout if you would like to have it of all her books and short stories and such. She gained a lot of press coverage, but Archie struggled to find a job after they were back. Apparently, he had to leave his job to go on this tour. I'm not surprised, but things at home had begun to sour. The family moved to Sunningdale in Berkshire. Agatha had few friends there. It was kind of isolated. She wasn't happy. She didn't like the house. And Archie didn't seem to notice. And here it should be said, Agatha Christie had a thing for houses. At one time, she owned 8 of them. At the same time, she'd just go, oh, that's a pretty house. And she'd go, oh, yes, I'm going to buy it. But Archie didn't seem to care about family life. He just spent his time playing golf, hanging out with his friends. It solidified Agatha's view on evil. She said, Archie murdered my happiness. Now we come to 1926, which Agatha called the worst year of my life. Agatha was forced to keep producing books because the Christie finances were beginning to become a problem. It was in that same year that Christie's mother, Clara, developed a severe respiratory illness and died at the age of 76. Agatha was devastated. Clara had always been Agatha's true north, her solid rock. In addition, her brother Monty, we talked about before, became addicted to morphine. No real surprise there, I guess. Frederick, Agatha's father, had passed away when she was only 11. So she was lonely. She was in deep grief. She hated where she lived, and she was working away as hard as she could, and her health began to suffer. Archie couldn't give her the emotional support that she needed, and he was out of the country when Clara died and didn't even arrive back in England until after the funeral. Agatha said she had no real understanding before that time that worry, unhappiness, and overwork could affect her health. She'd always been just healthy as could be and really strong woman. She was, and she also, on top of everything else, she had to spend 6 weeks at Ashfield to clear it out after Clara died, and the family had been living there. I cannot even imagine how much stuff they had to go through, and it was multi-generational. So, I mean, it was grandparents and great-grandparents stuff, and it must have been just excruciating. No wonder it took 6 weeks. She said, for the first time in my life, I was really ill. She had Madge to help her, and Rosalind, even though she was little, she said she was actually quite a lot of help. But she was tearful, she was forgetful, she was very lonely. She wrote, one day when I was just about to write a check, if I could not remember the name to sign it with. I felt like Alice in Wonderland. She tried different names. Was it this? Was it that? She thought she settled on one, but it was a character out of her book. And she said it was the beginning of a nervous breakdown. Unfortunately, Agatha was famous enough that her illness was carried in all the newspapers. You're beginning to see why she hated attention on herself and especially hated the press. Archie became the gunman. That old nightmare of mine, she said, that horror of sitting at a tea table, looking at my best loved friends and family, and suddenly realizing that the person sitting there was a stranger. She wrote, very few of us are what we seem. And clearly that's how she felt about Archie. Well, finally it all came out. Archie was in love with another woman. Her name was Nancy Neal, and he wanted a divorce from Agatha. Agatha knew her. She played golf on the same golf course as Archie, which I assume is how they met. And Agatha liked her. She didn't know her well, but she liked her. Agatha knew in hindsight what had happened, because remember, he told her he couldn't be relied upon, just came right out and said it. Author Lucy Worsley writes, the sense that evil can enter, will enter, even the snuggest of homes, the sense that nowhere is safe. In her autobiography, Agatha paints Archie as the murderer of her happiness. She was still very ill. The pressure of work, all the demands came at a time when she should have been just left alone to mourn her mother and her marriage. She fought Archie on the divorce for quite some time, but he was persistent. Finally, on the night of Friday, December 3rd, 1926, Agatha packed a bag, including a picture of Rosalind and her driver's license. It took along a fur coat. She threw the coat into the backseat of her car, and she had a very large sum of cash on her. I think it was noted as 60 pounds, which would probably be more like $3,000 today. She kissed Rosalind goodbye as she slept, and she left the house about 9:45 in the evening and disappeared. She left a note, of which only a few fragments remain, saying, get away from here, must leave this house, just isn't fair, my head is bursting. She was actually afraid that she might become a danger to Rosalind. A few days later, the police found her car, as we can see, empty, damaged, was resting on the steep hill which dropped down into an abandoned quarry. It was very steep. It contained her fur coat, her driver's license, which is how they easily identified who it belonged to, and her suitcase. Agatha had driven to the quarry with the idea that she was going to kill herself. Her car stalled and she was forced to spend the night in it. And which was, this is December. In the morning, someone did come along and help her get it going again. And yeah, but she tried again to take her life by driving to a steep hill and letting go of the steering wheel. The car caught on some bushes near the top and she hit her head on the steering wheel. Agatha got out of the car. She was disoriented and she left it behind with all her possessions inside, including that fur coat. She thought that she remembered wandering the countryside until she came to a train station, and then she just got on a train and took it to Harrogate to what we today might call a hotel and a spa. It was called the Hydropathic Hotel. Again, and get this, she signed the register as Mrs. Teresa Neal of South Africa. Suddenly she was her husband's mistress. She spent 11 days there in that hotel. The staff said she behaved very naturally. She didn't seem to be hiding at all. And when they began to figure out who she was, they were told to say nothing about it to her, to anyone else. She ate in the dining room, she socialized, she even made a few friends. But every day she read about Agatha Christie's disappearance in the papers and did not seem to associate it with herself at all. She read mystery novels, she went shopping. I guess she had to go shopping. She had nothing but the clothes on her back. No one could find Archie because he was spending the weekend with Nancy Neal. He didn't want his police to know about his adultery, so it was very convoluted stories. He finally gave a very, very ill-advised interview to one of the papers, and he was so inconsistent with what he said that the police really were getting suspicious about him. The police thought that she'd been murdered, possibly by Archie, or had indeed committed suicide. Oh my gosh, they dragged the pond by her car, was twice, and over 300 police officers entered the search and searched the heath. You see them on television with the sticks in a line, did that. And possibly as many as thousands of volunteers, just people from the neighborhood, entered the search as well.
Winnie,
A sketch
stop.
artist was
Winston,
commissioned to run her picture in a paper and on
barking.
posters.
Stop barking.
There were bloodhounds.
Stop.
The press was all over it, relentless. They offered a reward for information. Rumors were flying around. She had lost her memory. Archie had murdered her and taken up with a young woman. Agatha had committed suicide. Archie began to say Agatha disappeared on purpose to humiliate him, that she talked about it before. Do anything to keep Nancy Neal's name out of the press. Newspapers were heartless. They were saying she played a cruel, spiteful joke on family and friends and was to make Archie suffer. Finally, on December 14th, word came that Agatha was probably at the Hydropathic Hotel. Archie and a police inspector now came to believe she had lost her memory. They came to the hotel, and this is hard to imagine today, but they didn't want to startle her, so she would become hysterical. But they waited in the lobby by the elevator for her to come down for dinner. And eventually she did come down. The staff had all, gathered around the elevator to see what was going to happen, but they were very disappointed because the meeting was really anticlimactic. Archie just walked up to her. Agatha seemed to recognize him and they very calmly went into dinner in the dining room together. Later, someone said that she had introduced him to some of her friends there as her brother. This is a photo of her leaving the hotel. It was agreed that rather than go back to the Christie home, she would go to Abney, which was her sister Madge's home. Agatha once wrote, "Never go back to a place where you have been happy. Until you do, it remains alive for you. If you go back, it will be destroyed." She was constantly surrounded by the press, and they heaped public shame on her. They thought she was making it all up. She thought that women couldn't be trusted, that they were that she was trying to gain publicity for her books. And as her memory came back, understandably, so did her depression. She went to medical doctors, she went to psychiatrists, and now she had a deep and very understandable need for privacy. No one has ever learned the real reason Agatha Christie disappeared. She never spoke of it again. Um, it's been thought recently that it was a matter of her being a woman at that time when it was just so much easier to blame and shame than it was to say this woman was really ill and she should have been left alone, and she had every right to go off by herself, maybe didn't do it the right way, but she needed time to heal, and she wasn't given it. And she just had to go back to writing her books. Archie and Agatha were divorced in 1928. I think actually her eyes look so much happier in this one than they do in that one. Doesn't she look kind of sad in that one? But anyway. Okay, so there is a bright grace note to this story. After her divorce, Agatha went solo to Egypt. Can you imagine at that time, a woman went solo to Egypt on the Orient Express? Sounds familiar to us, doesn't it? She returned to the Middle East again in 1930, and this time she went to in what is now Iraq. She had made good friends there in the previous trips, and she had spent several seasons with them on architectural digs, and she just absolutely loved it. She loved travel. She loved that part of the world. At the dig, she met an archaeologist, and his name was Max Mallowan. Good old Max. Despite the fact that Agatha was 14 years older than Max, they did fall in love. And despite the difference in their ages, it was a marriage of equals, such as Agatha had never experienced before. She wrote, "I should have been on my guard. I should have never slipped into this easy, happy relationship." And to Max, she wrote, "Being with you is a kind of freedom. There is no feeling of restraint or captivity or being tied down. I would never have believed anything could be like it." They bought a house called Greenway. They married on September 11th, 1930 at St. Cuthbert's Church in Edinburgh. She once said, "An archaeologist is the best husband a woman can have. The older she gets, the more interested he is in her." I have to think that good old Max here was standing on a box, because she was also a little bit taller, quite a bit taller than he was too. He's not a very tall man, but he was a sweet and generous man, and he absolutely adored her, and it was reciprocal. They really did live in Greenway in Dartmouth, very happily until 1934. And it was the happily ever after that Agatha had always wanted. And they remained devoted to each other until Agatha's death on January 12th, 1976. Max kind of struggled on for a little while, and then he died only about a year after she did. Agatha Christie's superpower is her psychological depth. Early on, she created a formula that she would adhere to in her novels. Nothing is what it seems. Evil is when you least expect it. As a whodunit novelist, each story had many puzzles that made the plot gripping and pulse pounding, and her uncanny ability to breathe life into characters through mysterious themes. She knew from her own life that evil can be found where it is least suspected. She said evil is not something superhuman, it is something less than human. Wow, do we have any? It's ended a little sooner than I thought it was going to. How about questions and comments? Now remember, if you want folks at home to hear, it has to be into the microphone. Doug?
So how many years again did she disappear?
Not
Or she-
years, weeks. It was 11 weeks.
11 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry. He's entirely right. It was 11 days. I don't know where I came up with weeks. Sorry about that. 11 days was startling enough. Does anyone have a particularly favorite Agatha Christie book that you always recommend to other people or think it's a good place to start reading Agatha Christie? And then there were none. That's widely considered to be one of her very best books. And I just reread it recently, and I was on the last couple of pages before I went, I still don't know who did it. It's still not possible for anyone to have done this. So, anybody else? Yes.
Do you know how many of her books were made into movies?
That I'm not sure about. As you probably know, there were a lot of movies with different plot lines, especially around her disappearance. And there was one with Vanessa Redgrave where the plot was she killed Madge. So I think that's a little odd. I think most of us are familiar with the BBC PBS series for Poirot and for Miss Marple. And they were very, very good. I don't know if anybody saw recently, they had a series. I think it wasn't on PBS. I think it was on BritBox, where David Suchet, who was Poirot for 25 years, and I think if Agatha Christie had been alive when he was doing that, she would have said, "Oh my gosh, he just nailed it," you know. But he followed the tour of the British mysteries mission, and he went around and explained, what happened here and what happened there, and I think it's a real credit to his abilities as an actor that in real life, now he's older, he did it for 25 years, but in real life, he looks nothing like Hercule Poirot. His whole shape of his face is different. So I think we got to really credit that. Yes.
Oh, we had a online question from Patricia. She wants to know, did Agatha Christie know of Dorothy Sayre, another detective writer at the time?
I don't know. She certainly was in that group, Dorothy Sayers and who wrote the Campion books? I'm not sure. I remember who did. But yeah, she was in that kind of sisterhood of detective novelists at that time. So I'm sure she probably knew of her, but I can't be sure that she actually had ever met her. Anybody else? You're all so shy. She's like Agatha Christie.
It seems like when she and Archie split up, Rosalind was still pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
And then there seems to be sort of a gap, or is there not much of a gap before Mallowan comes along? Was there a time when she was single with a child for a while? Did they?
Not very long. Her horrible year reminds me of the Queen, what is that, Annus Horribilis or whatever it is in Latin. But that was 1926, and she met Max in 1930. So it wasn't terribly long. One of the things she held over Archie's head when he wanted a divorce and she didn't was Rosalind. And she said that, Rosalind likes, loves you so much more than she loves me. She's so much more comfortable with you. You need to be around her and all that kind of stuff. But we know that Archie was kind of looked out for Archie. I think he did love Rosalind, and she really did love him. Agatha had kind of an interesting sort of off beat version of motherhood in that she passionately loved Rosalind, but she kind of treated her as another little adult that lived in the house. And she it wasn't that kind of all encompassing physical love relationship that that I think her mother had with Clara had with Agatha, and that a lot of us nowadays think of as good motherhood. But Rosalind turned out okay. She went through some kind of difficult seasons, and I have to think some of those must have been when she was a teenager because, doesn't everybody? But she eventually married and had children of her own, and her son, James, and Agatha Christie were very close. James talks about, I think he's still living, and he talks about how he just adored his grandma, and they had a very special relationship. So I don't know, maybe she had the relationship with her grandchildren that she didn't have necessarily with Rosalind.
We have another online question.
Oh, how about the online one, and then we'll go there.
Peter asked, did the nervous breakdown and subsequent divorce shift the nature of her writing, how and what she wrote about?
Well, she was pretty aware of evil lurking in even the happiest of homes, as I said. And she'd always thought of it that way. But when Archie became the gunman to her, I think that's when she had a lot more in her books about person's face is only a mask, hides their real self, and that type of thing.
Yeah, and she just had the one child then with Archie.
Just Rosalind.
Okay.
And she never had any children with Max.
Oh, okay.
She was 14 years older than he was, but he was really young when he was like in his 20s when they met. And she really fought it. She just kept thinking, why was this child interested in me? But he was very passionate about her, and finally wore her down, I think.
And at the beginning, you said her books were only outsold by the Bible and what other?
William Shakespeare.
Shakespeare. Oh,
Yes.
Would you say that Agatha Christie's reputation, well, as an author, obviously she sold, tons of books, but her personal reputation, it seemed like it took a little bit of a dive around her disappearance, etc. Did it rebound and stay, or did she have ups and downs in terms of how she was perceived by her reading public or the public in general?
Well, the public, of course, there was all kinds of rumors and, gossip and all that kind of stuff about it, her disappearance. But and I think the real culprits was the police. It was not the police. Well, it was the police, but it was also the press, that they just needed to blame her for what was an actual real mental condition. That she finally, when she did come home, she started going to psychiatrists, which was very hushed up. She had to go to one on what's the main medical mile there in London? I know it as well as anybody. Anyway, Harley Street. Anyway, and she did go to, they've done research that they only found one practicing psychologist on Harley Street. Is it? That's not quite right. Anyway, it is right? Okay. You should have spoken up earlier. at that time. And so they pretty much figured out who it was. And he was very good. I think he used some hypnotism, which was kind of a new thing at that point, to see if he could bring her memory back because she still had big gaps in her memory. And she did get a lot of it back, but she never told anybody what really happened. And as her memory came back, her depression started to come back as well. But she kept writing. And I think once the public got over trying to blame her for everything, then this was only 1926, and she wrote a lot of great books before, even before 1931, she wrote 11 more. And obviously we think she's great today too. I personally think that her abilities kind of trailed off when she got quite old. Some of the books are kind of, I don't know, just not as good as her usual. But she, during World War II, she chose to live in London during the Blitz. And she said she just went, she'd hear the bombs and she'd say, and she wouldn't even go down to the bomb shelters necessarily. And that was a very productive time for her of books. And she once said that the reason that she wrote was so productive and during that time was she really did think she was going to die. She thought she was going to be killed in the war, in the Blitz. So she wanted to leave behind a big body of work. And guess what? She lived a lot longer than that. And there were a lot more books. Anybody else? Doug?
If I had been an English major in college, I probably know the answer to this, but the genre of murder mystery, detective novel, did that even exist before she came along?
Yes. Yes. Some people, I don't know if this is true or not. Some people think that Wilkie Collins, who wrote the Moonstone, was the first actual mystery novel. And that was what, late 1800s, I guess. Yeah. What was that? Oh, yeah. Well, that was also similar time, but I'm trying to think what differentiated them. They were very different. I think because Agatha Christie wrote a lot of different things. I mean, she didn't just write detective novels. She wrote a series, wait, they weren't a series, but she wrote a number of books under the name of Mary Westmacott. Because her publishers were just really leaning on her to write romances, write something other than a detective novel. So she wrote romances, and she hated it. She just hated it. One of them that I read, I think it was called Absent in the Spring. And it's from it's perspective of a woman who is a middle-ish class British woman who has all of the prejudice and all of the snobbery and everything that, the worst sort of version of a person like that. And she gets stranded in Iraq at a train station, which has a hotel attached to it. She can stay in the hotel. And this is a great time of psychological reckoning for this woman. And she begins to see how she's been wrong about, the way she's treated people, the way she's treated her family, her views. And the thing, and I thought, oh, well, this is really interesting. But at the end, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but at the end, she goes back to her old habits, her old feelings. She doesn't really learn her lesson. And I just found that very frustrating. But yeah, if any of you have not read The Man in the Brown Suit, I think I would really recommend that to you. It isn't Poirot or Miss Marple or any of those. It's just centers on this very young woman who kind of just throws caution to the wind and goes off and thinks she's looking for a husband, but then isn't looking. It's really entertaining. And in one part of it, she and another character get off I guess they're on a train, And there's all these local people with their wares, to sell to the tourists. And some of them are carved, little carved animals, and giraffes and zebras and things like that. And they're just really taken with them and they buy a bunch of them. I won't spoil it, but they do figure in the plot. And there is a picture of Agatha Christie at a desk with the giraffe and some other little animals sitting around. So she drew on that. I feel the feeling I didn't answer a question. Well,
So the question on Dorothy Sayer,
mhm.
they did know each other.
Oh,
They were both members of the detection club. a group of
that's
writers.
right.
Yeah, there you
Yes.
go.
And who were some of the other ladies that were included in that? Who?
It was women and men were in it. It was.
Oh, I thought it was
yeah, it
only
was a
women.
mix- No, it was a mixed group. They did collaborate on a book called The Floating Admiral and 2 radio serials.
I did not know that. That's
Thanks
fascinating.
to AI.
Oh, yeah. Thank
Brought
you.
to by AI.
Good old AI is good for something anyway.
Another online question, Patricia asked, did she write outside of her own experiences whereby she had to do research?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I think some people have complained that her books are often set in upper class or upper middle class British settings, is the country house weekend where, and then it rained and nobody could get out. And so it was the closed room mystery. She did do quite a lot of that because that's what she knew. And I think she wrote much less that was just ordinary people. The man in the brown suit was just a regular ordinary person. And I kind of think the Pale Horse was interesting because the book and 2 different BBC productions of it are all 3 not even the same plot. I mean, they're entirely different. So it just depends on pick one. I actually think the most recent, which isn't very recent, Miss Marple one with the last Miss Marple that we've seen on television was the best, but that's just my opinion. And there was somebody.
Actually, Pat, I have 2 questions. The first one, when she discovered that Archie was having an affair, there was a book out about this. Didn't she work to try to win him back,
Mhm.
thinking she was not maybe as beautiful or as attractive? And then when that didn't work, would you say that was when she sort of really went into her state of depression? I thought there was a time in that book that I'd read that she really spent time wanting her husband back.
Oh,
She did
yes.
love it.
Yeah, no, she refused to believe him
You're right.
at first. And, it did really rankle that Nancy Neal was young and I've seen pictures, she was very pretty. And she was a lot younger than Agatha. And as we saw earlier, Agatha was very pretty when she was young. But, she just did become rather matronly looking as she got older. But she was convinced that Archie would get over it.
Yep.
And so she really did try a lot of things. And as I said, she kind of used Rosalind as bait a lot of the time. But finally, she just couldn't ignore it any longer. And he just came right out and said, I want a divorce. And still she wouldn't give him a divorce.
No, that's right.
Yeah. So,
And then she disappeared, sort of. My second question is with Murder on the Orient Express. In Istanbul, there's a hotel, the Pure Palace,
mhm,
and they have the Agatha Christie room there.
mhm, I've been there.
I have too. It's lovely. But they say that is where she wrote Murder on the Orient Express in that room.
I don't know.
His name is
some of those-
Winston. What's your doggy's name?
Yeah, I did not.
Casey.
She.
How old is your
It's a
doggy?
very plain, oh, good, AI again.
Oh,
Um,
good.
Just a-
Oh, I could have done that too.
Bails me out every time. But Yeah, and it's a very plain room, but they say, and here is her desk, and, they've got it laid out with like some pen and paper and things like that. And often when you see, oh, this is where, like going to Hemingway's house, this was his studio, although you can't deny that really was his studio, in Florida. But, so I always, at the time, I thought, really? Is this really the room? Did they make a room up to look like, was it even in this hotel? But all I've been able to find is that, yeah, that she did stay there and she did have a room and they have kept it to seem like she's still there, but I really don't know very many details. She did. Yeah, that's how she took it more than once. She took it to go to Baghdad. And I also think They Came to Baghdad is a good one of her books too. And what's I gonna say? Yes, and then she made these friends that were archaeologists, and they kept inviting her to come out for a season, because they were there the season of archaeological digs, and they were kind of flaky, but she liked them and they liked her, and they kept inviting her. And I think Max was actually working on the dig when, not necessarily just a friend of these people, but he was actually working on the dig when they met. So. What else? We've still got time. Well, I enjoyed doing this very much. I did not enjoy doing the technical part. That's why you don't have all that many slides. I came and bothered Amy and Hannah 3 times this week trying to get it right. I'm just not that kind. I have a computer that I'm not very familiar with yet, and that was causing all kinds of problems. And it did make me feel better that I brought it in and Hannah was looking at it and she goes, "Why is it doing this? Where is the," so she was having some similar issues, even though she knows lots. So, and Hank, okay, thank you.